As the saying goes, history repeats itself. And we in the United States are in the midst of experiencing one of those moments.
Welcome to the Empowerment Zone with Ramona Houston, where we zone in on Black and Brown relations and our journey to empowering our communities.
As an American historian, it is always a pleasure for me to talk to a fellow historian about contemporary issues and connect them to the past. Today, we are talking politics and the influence of racism on American politics. My discussion with Dr. Abel Bartley focuses on the prevalence of racism throughout American history and how its irrational influence has created a society that attempts to hurt people of color, but ends up hurting everyone. Dr. Abel Bartley is a professor of African American and urban history at Clemson University. He is the current chair of the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission and president of the Southern Conference on African American Studies, Incorporated. Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Abel Bartley. Welcome to the Empowerment Zone.
Thank you, Ramona. How are you doing today?
Doing fine, Dr. Bartley. I'm excited about having a conversation with you. Today, we're going to talk about politics, cultural preservation, and education, which is right on point for what my listeners want to hear about. And it's always a pleasure to see you and connect with you. We've been friends since our membership in the Southern Conference for African American Studies, Incorporated. That's where we met. And it's wonderful to have you on the Empowerment Zone.
Thank you. I mean, I think we've known each other, 10, 15 years?
Yeah.
You were
It's
like
been a
two
while.
when I met you, right?
Yeah. So before we get into this conversation, I always allow my guests to tell us a little bit about yourself. We always like to hear about our guests so that our audience can get to know you and connect with you before we get into this intense conversation. So could you tell us a little bit about your personal and professional background?
Okay, no problem. I'm a native of Jacksonville, Florida. Proud graduate of Terry Parker High School in Jacksonville, and went to Florida State University. Most people call it the Harvard of the South. I call it the Harvard of Harvard. Went to Florida State, got my undergraduate, my BA in history and political science. Got an MA in history and a PhD in African American urban history. I studied Black politics and urban development. And, you know, I sort of, when I went to college, I had this crazy idea of being an engineering, but then I realized that if you can't do math, engineering doesn't work. But I've been inspired by history, particularly African American history. There are two stories I think that really sort of put me on the path of history. My first history class I took with a guy by the name of David Ammerman, who taught U.S. history. And he did an experiment which really transformed me, how I looked at history. He put a chair on one side of the room and he walked to the other side. And he said, what would happen if this chair levitated up and floated over to me? And he started asking students what they would write about that experience. And each person wrote something differently. And then he said, you know, with historians, with history, that's what it is. It's writing about experiences. And the reason we don't know much about African Americans is because nobody writes about the African American experience. Nobody writes about the women's experience. No one writes about the Hispanic experience. Nobody writes about the Native experience. And so that really, it's amazing how little we know about ourselves and how much we know about other people. And so that inspired me. And then the other thing, I think, a line from Shakespeare's wonderful play Othello. He uses the character Iago to ask a question. You know, he says that if a man steals your purse, he doesn't steal much, because all that can be replaced. But if a person steals your good name, he robs you of something that does not enrich him, but makes you poor indeed. And clearly the good name of African Americans have been robbed from us. And I've been dedicated to restoring our good name.
Wow, what an incredible story. So, when you look at your efforts to restore our name in terms of African Americans, what type of work are you doing in that process?
That's a very good question. I'm a historian. I started out at at University of Akron in 1994. Began teaching history, and then I got involved in building Pan-African Studies programs. And so I built the Pan-African Studies program at University of Akron, created what was called Pan-African City for Community Development. And it was a research area where we connected the community to the African American community. Then I got invited to turn what was at the time a moribund Black Studies program at Clemson University. And we created the Pan-African Studies program at Clemson University. We graduated several people, and we created a Pan-African Studies program. And what I want people to understand is that we need to correct the misconceptions people have about Africa, because it bleeds into misconceptions about African Americans. And so I'm connecting those two things. Plus, the other thing I'm trying to let people understand is that when you talk about race and racial problems, we often concentrate on the wrong people. African Americans are not the problem. African Americans stuff has been done to us. We have not been doing things to other people. And so those are the kind of things that I've been working to correct. Education to me is the key. I think it was Marcus Garvey who said education is the passport that opens up the world to other people. Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X, one of them said that. And that's what when you change a person's mind and get them to think differently, I think you have really created somebody who can change the world.
So Clemson is where you kind of settled down then, huh?
Yes, that's where I'm at now. I've been here for now 17 years. And
wow.
It's been a minute. So it's been a good time. I've had some good experiences, had some tough experiences, but I've enjoyed being here.
That's good. So let's get right into your topic. We're talking about politics, cultural preservation, and education. All of them are interconnected, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure that's why you chose that topic. But what are your concepts of those?
Well, let me throw another two plugs in here. I am the chair of the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission, which is a commission set up by the governor. It was set up in the late 1990s for cultural preservation for the state of South Carolina, because at the time there were almost no historical markers commemorating African American accomplishments in South Carolina, and so they created this commission, and since then we've made over 140 markers. We've set up 140 markers in the state of South Carolina, commemorating historic events, historic places in South Carolina. And so that's one of the things that has really been inspiring to me, because there's so much history. Most people don't even know, most South Carolinians don't even know that until the 1920s, South Carolina was a majority African American state.
That's why I don't know if you were looking at my face. That's why I was kind of amazed that it was no historical markers, or very few in South Carolina, because so many African Americans live there. And we know during the institution of slavery that it was 3 to 1, 3 Africans to one person. So one white person. So it's a very large African population, or descendants of Africans.
Well, and that tells you what kind of work we had to get done. And I don't blame the African American community, but because what was happening, we had a very rigidly conservative political institutions that were very reluctant to change. And so you had a lot of commemoration of things that whites had done, particularly whites during the Civil War and during the period of slavery, but very little emphasis on what happened after. But even if you talk about the period of slavery, there's so much history that had not been commemorated. And so this commission, what we've been doing is we've been encouraging people who are part of historic places or historic events to commemorate it with markers. And so we help them write up the stuff, we help them raise money for it, and we help them get markers set up. And so it helps tell a different part of the South Carolina story than it you traditionally hear.
Mm. Incredible work and much needed work, right? When you look at the fact that you went from little to none to 140 markers, 140 plus markers right now. That's great. And there's so much more work to be done, I'm sure. Goodness,
yes. And one of the other things we did is we created the Green Book of South Carolina, which recreates the Green Book area. I know most people may not know, but Victor Green had this book. Let me do a little bit back. Mm-hmm. When African Americans traveled before the Civil Rights period, they could not stay at the Holiday Inn, the Sheraton, old place. They had to find other accommodations. And so this postman by the name of Victor Green, he went through each state and found places that African Americans could eat, where they could use the restroom, where they could sleep, where they could get gas, those kind of things along the travel routes in the United States. And he put this together in what was called the Green Book. Mm-hmm. And each African American family that traveled utilized the Green Book to find places to eat. Well, what we've done is we've created an online version, a virtual version of the Green Book. So people who are traveling now, they can listen to the history as they pass by historic Green Book sites. They can listen to the history of it, and if you want to stop in, you can stop in and engage in traditional places that were part of the Green Book of South Carolina. And so it's now a travel app that people can have on their phones or whatever device they're using.
I love it. Where did y'all come up with that idea? How?
We have some really talented people, Janie Harrod and Don House. We have some really incredibly talented people who have really next world or next generation ideas of how to move South Carolina forward. And so they're trying to do as much as they can to integrate African Americans into their history. One of the things we do, there are a whole bunch of people who come back to South Carolina for family reunions. So we have the family reunion toolkit, which helps you organize family reunions, but also make it historical, where you can go to some of those Green Book sites and other things. So there's a lot of good stuff going on as far as preservation in South Carolina with the African American community. And I'm just, as the chair of the commission, I just sit back because I have such a great team. I get a lot of credit for it, but most of the work is being done by the people who are hard at work doing the work. Just incredible. Strauss Stiefel, who's my vice chair. She does great work. We have a really great team.
Wow. Impressive work. Congratulations. And I wish you the best on that commission. It looks like y'all are really making an impact in the historical studies in terms of making it public history, right?
Yes.
Where the public can actually embrace it. So what is that other plug you have?
Well, the other plug is the Southern Conference of African American Studies Incorporated.
Yes, please. Tell us all about it.
I have been serving as president of that organization for the last few years also. It is another organization which tries to bring young scholars and bring people together for the study of the African American studies. It is a interdisciplinary organization made up of intellectuals, but not just intellectuals, people who are interested in African American history, African history, whatever. And so we have been working to bring scholars. We have a scholarly journal called the Griot, which allows young scholars or older scholars to demonstrate their work or to present their work. We have a yearly conference. This year, our conference will be held February 10th and 11th, I think it is. And it's a virtual conference. We connect most of the HBCUs. We really encourage the HBCUs. We just entered into a wonderful agreement with Texas Southern. They're going to be partnering with us as we expand the Griot and the work of the Griot. And it's been a place where we've connected a lot of young African American scholars with other African American scholars, and we've done a lot of intellectual work. And it's been a place where we've introduced a lot of good intellectual work, rewriting the stories about African American history. And so it is another very important project that I'm part of. And it just gives me great joy. I mean, when I look at the talent, the tremendous talent pool we have of young African American scholars and the work that they're doing, just incredible.
Yes, I am a longtime member of the Southern Conference on African American Studies Incorporated, also referred to affectionately as SCASE. And in fact, SCASE was extremely important to my educational and professional development as a historian. My mentor, Dr. Alma Williams, actually is the one who introduced me to the conference. She is a former president of SCASE, and she was my history professor at Clark Atlanta University. It was Clark College at the time. And my first SCASE conference was in 1988 in Lemoyne-Owen College. One of the things that SCASE does when it has its conferences in the past, I don't know if it still does it since we're in a virtual setting right now, but we always had at least one event at the local HBCU that was in the city. So at that time we were in Memphis, so we had an event at Lemoyne-Owen College. And I know, going to Dallas, we had it at Bishop. It was Bishop College at the time. And wherever we've traveled, we've always held at least one event at the local historically Black college and university, also called HBCUs. So to all you scholars out there listening, this is a great organization. It's a small organization that really gives you the opportunity to present your work in a very, what I would call welcoming environment, where people are still they still assess your work and evaluate and critique your work, but it's done in such a way that it's in a loving way, and it's a safe space and place to present your work as a scholar. If you're a scholar out there presenting your work, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, it's a great place for undergraduate as well as graduate students. Throughout my graduate career, I was presenting at SCASE. So thanks for making that plug, Dr. Bartley.
And one real quick thing, we were going to be at North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, but because of the new outbreak in COVID, we at the last moment changed it to a virtual. But yeah, we like to keep that connection to HBCUs. We last year we had a lot of young scholars, and the thing that we're a family at SCASE, and so it's not our job to discourage young scholars. We tell you how to take your paper to the next level. And that's what I think is different from most other conferences where people critique it in such a way where you think, there's no hope. But we believe that this is, you've got the foundation to some good work.
And not only that, you'll meet scholars from all over the country, particularly scholars in the South. It seems to be the majority of the membership, but that's a great way for you to network with other scholars. For those of you who are pursuing opportunities in higher education, visibility at this conference is great in terms of making connections and paving the way for you to enter higher education in terms of as a professional.
And one last little plug, getting that first couple of articles published is very important for moving to the next level of tenure. And so we have our own scholar. It's a scholarly journal that is peer reviewed, and every school accepts contribution. I mean, that accepts it as a peer reviewed article. That every school I've ever taught at or been to accepts a peer reviewed article written in our griot as a peer reviewed article. So if you want an opportunity to get early publication in a journal that's respected and peer reviewed, join SCASE and do something in the griot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bartley, for those two plugs. And we appreciate your commitment to both of those organizations and making an impact in the United States and beyond. That's what we're all about here at the Empowerment Zone is impact. And we work to highlight people who are making an impact. So let's talk about politics, cultural preservation, and education, which is a mouthful, but something that I'm really interested in talking to you about. What's your concepts?
Well, here's the thing. History, I hate to say history repeats itself, but history does go in cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And this period that we're living in reminds us so much of the 1880s through 1900.
I was hoping you would. I was like, please let them choose that time, because I always tell people that, and I was wondering which one you were going to compare it to, but you are so correct on that. So school is prof.
If you are a student of history, and even if you're not, you can see the exact same things that were happening in that period happening again. We have the tremendous moment when we have the first African American elected as president. And then from the moment he's elected, you see the regressive forces moving to make sure that African Americans never again get that kind of power. And so you saw it in the last election, you saw an election before that, where there's this movement now to, we don't want to share this democracy. We want only a small group of people to have access to it. And so you see basically the same thing you saw in the 1880s, 1890s, the same kind of laws. We want voting restrictions. Well, why? Because, people are voting illegal. Well, we're telling the people who are voting illegal. And the only ones we can find are the people who are part of the group that's trying to stop. So it is clearly about power, and it's clearly about the last hurrah for people who are in charge, who recognize that time is running out. I think one of the things that everybody talks about is the 2040 report that came out a few years ago, where everyone, I don't know if many people know about, but in 2040, America will be a majority minority country. And so the idea that whites won't be in charge anymore, I think is a frightening concept for some people. And so in 1880s, 1890s, they saw the same thing in the South. We're not going to be in charge anymore. So what can we do to undermine that? And so you see this attack. You see the attack on education, where education budgets have been stripped, and then all these attacks on things like critical race theory. What is it? Education is about truth. Almost every school, if you look in their motto, they talk about truth and knowledge. And why would we be afraid of the truth? Well, the reason you're afraid of the truth is because the truth hurts, and there's a lot of things in the past that have not been done well or not been done right. And so you've had this attack, this sort of regressive attack on education. Then you look at politics. As I mentioned about politics earlier, this attack on voting rights. It seems like a simple thing, and then clearly the 1965 Voting Rights Act was supposed to do it, and the 14th Amendment was supposed to do it. If you are a naturalized, or if you are a citizen of the United States, you should have an unhampered access to the franchise. And yet you see, and in the states that have traditionally tried to keep African Americans, Hispanics, and women from voting, there's this attack on getting them the right to vote. Why? Because they recognize they will lose power. As early as the 1960s, Republican politicians were saying, if we open the franchise up and let everybody vote, it'll destroy the Republican Party. And you see, they recognize that in 2020, and they're doing everything they can to make sure we block access to the franchise. And the unfortunate thing is, so many even of African American eyes are blinded to what's going on. There's an assault on our rights that is frightening. And then we talk about. You're
totally on point. The assault on rights everywhere. People. I heard comedian Wanda Sykes. She's married to a European woman, and she talked about traveling over in Europe, and when people hear her talk, they realize she's American because she has this accent, right? And so this was right after, it was during the Trump era. and everything, like you said, this whole regressive attack on education, politics, all these things. And so people would ask her, Europeans would ask her, what happened to America? What happened to America? And because we're the shining light for the world, right? Supposedly. And she's in her answer was, I don't know. We elected Barack Obama and white folks lost their mind. And so it just puts it in context, like you said, when there's progress, and this has happened throughout the United States history, when there is progress among African Americans, there's always this pushback to keep Black people in control and other groups of people in control. But Black progress is the main threat there. And people don't recognize, particularly those who don't really study or understand history, that your franchise can be taken away. Like you stated, the 1880s and 90s, that's what that was all about. Yeah. Taking power away, taking the opportunity to learn away. You know, when you take a look at education, when you look at politics, when you look at economics, you know, and taking land away, and all these things happened before in the United States. And we're in that era now that is very scary, because it does appear that we're repeating our history.
Yeah, when you look at it, I have conversations with people. You know, I live here in South Carolina and upstate of South Carolina, and it's just amazing to me the hold that the Republican Party has on people in this area. And I don't want to attack Republicans per se, but if you think of the background of the Republican Party and what they stand for, it really doesn't make much sense for a person who's not very wealthy, not well educated, to be a Republican. But what it is, you see this whole notion that there's, particularly in my area, there are people who are willing to cut their own throat to cut mine. Because any progress by African Americans, even if it means I progress also, is a bad thing. So Obamacare, which was going to bring health care to millions of people who had no access to it, we would rather not have health care if it means you get health care. There's so many different things that you see. We would rather have a poor educational system if it means that your educational system is improved.
Well, you know, that goes to the insanity of racism. It's really no logic. It's true insanity when you look at what racism, how it influences you to think, where you are so interested in suppressing, oppressing, exploiting another group of people, that you can't even see that the decisions you make are affecting you as well.
Well, you're a historian. You know, this is a repeating notion, because the populist movement in the 1880s, 1890s, Black farmers and white farmers were both in a horrific situation, and they had an opportunity to work together to improve their situation. And what happened? What was the bugaboo that destroyed them? Racism. They said, I would rather, as a white farmer, not progress if it means that Black farmers are going to get some progress also. And that's, like you say, it's the insanity of racism, where I would rather not progress myself if it means you're going to progress with me. And it's that white supremacy thing that we can't share the power. I've got to have all the power, and I'll divvy up to you what you deserve. And it goes in number. I mean, think about it, even in education, there's tremendous potential in America's schools, particularly these young African Americans. I tell my classes all the time, I say, think about all the bridges that weren't built, all the diseases that weren't cured, all the problems that weren't solved, because the South thought it was funny to give African Americans a second-class education, while doing that, it meant that they also got a second-class education. We might have cured cancer. We don't know how many African Americans would have cured. We don't know of the people who were lynched, how many of them had the potential to cure cancer, to build bridges across solve some of the problem, because we took potential and we destroyed it because of this craziness that we call racism in America.
And that it's something as they say it's wages of whiteness that what is that, Du Bois, right?
Yeah.
That is something we whites in America get out of their whiteness that allows them to want to be white more so than solve the social challenges of the day.
Yeah, if we could just get Americans to understand that it's not a zero-sum game. That if African Americans gain, it doesn't mean that whites lose. It means that we all go up. I mean, there's an old saying, rising tides lift all boats. Well, there's a fear that if black boats are lifted, then some of the white boats are going to be. And that's what not only blacks, but Hispanic boats. I mean, look at the craziness with immigration. Countries that allow immigrants in and allow them to participate in the economic activity, their economies grow. But what are we doing? We're so nihilistic in the way we look at society, and we have this closed-mindedness that if we allow these brown people in, they're going to take over and blah blah. It's really kind of insane how racism works. Several people say it's like a virus that keeps mutating, and that's what it keeps doing. Just when we think we solve it over here, we get the Omicron racism over here, and we're constantly behind the 8 ball with it.
So as a scholar, we often analyze and reanalyze and critique the challenges, the problems. As a scholar, what do you see as some of the solutions to the challenges that we have?
One of the things I am most impressed with are the young people that I see today, and how even though they have been inundated with a lot of the racist ideas and those things, they are doing some incredibly impressive scholarship and work. And they're thinking outside of the box. For a lot of us, and I'll get some a little older than you, we have a lot of, there's a what they call a limit to the possible. Because we only can see so far because of how we've been set. I mean, when President Obama was elected president, that was something that I never thought I would see.
Me too. I always tell people I never saw it. I said I didn't think my grandchildren would see a black president. That's how far I thought it was off. I thought it was possible way 50, 100 years from now, maybe.
I'm with you. But it changed the limits to the possible now, because if we can be president, what else can we? I remember I had an opportunity to talk to Ed Bradley years ago when he came to the University of Akron, and Ed Bradley was talking. He was talking about growing up in Philadelphia, and as he started out as a school teacher, and we were talking about. Someone asked him if you had a chance. Ed Bradley was the old African American who used to be on 60 Minutes, and someone asked him if you had a chance to interview anybody on 60 Minutes throughout history, any historical figure, who would you like to interview? He said there were 2 people he would love to have gotten on 60 Minutes. One, Jesus Christ. He said he'd love to have gotten Jesus Christ on 60 Minutes. But the other one he said was Jackie Robinson. And he said he would love to have interviewed Jackie, because he said for a lot of people, Rosa Parks marks the civil rights, but he said not for him and not for most people that know him. He said the day that Jackie Robinson ran up and took first base for the Brooklyn Dodgers, he said that was the day his limits to the possible changed. Because he said if a black man can be on a baseball field and play with whites and be treated the same way as white, then anything else is possible. And so for my kids, I tell them, you now have seen a black president. You got blacks on the Supreme Court. You got blacks. I said, so now what can't you do? And so, there's no real limit on their possible. And if your mind, just exactly to say it, if your mind can believe it in your heart, then your heart can achieve it. So that's, you can, whatever you want to do is possible now. And I'm very impressed with these young people who have that idea. We can solve the problem of poverty. We can solve the problem of racism. We can solve the problem. And that kind of attitude is just amazing to me. That gives me hope.
Totally agree with you on now the limits have been taken off of the possible, and that I know for me personally, I just thought the presidency was something that was off limits to the U.S. presidency, excuse me, of the U.S. Was not a position we would ever we would it would be hard for us to see. Let's say that. I say in the future, but I say 50 or 100 years, but in my mind it was really, really impossible in terms of the United States. Just being a historian and understanding our history. And even when President Obama was elected, I really didn't think he was going to make it to the White House, let alone 2 terms. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so just knowing U.S. history, I'm just saying my truth. And so now down to your point, we have no excuses. We can really press to achieve the impossible, even though we never had limits, right? We've never had limits, but we've accepted those limits, know? And so, and each step counts in terms of impact and empowerment. That there, for me to see President Obama he was the keynote speaker at the 100th anniversary of the NAACP. That was just a moment for me, just thinking about, the study of the 20th century, but for my work as a historian, and all the steps that had to be taken before he became president, and that's what I'm talking about. Those of us living today, we have a step to take. We have to make an impact. We have to make that empowerment step. And so, anyway, this conversation is very powerful in influencing our listeners and realizing the moment that we're living in, and the fact that we have to embrace this moment and do what is necessary in order that we don't repeat our history.
I agree. I totally agree. And, adding one other thing to it, President Obama getting elected was a miracle. But then winning re-election, it shows that it wasn't a fluke. It was something. And I think had he been able to run again, he would have been elected a third time. And that shows us that, there was potential, but just as soon as we take 2 steps forward, there's going to be people pushing back. And so that also has been things. The other thing that I think is important is what you said. We've always been only part of the story has ever been told about America. From the beginning, women were important. From the beginning, African Americans were important. From the beginning, Hispanics were important. From the beginning, everybody. America is not a monolith. It is a place where everybody has played a role. I used to start my class asking them, name me 5 African Americans who participated in the American Revolution. And and I say, well, give me 5 women. And none of they can't think of anybody. And I'll say, do you know the first person to die in America's fight for freedom was an African American? The first 2 heroes.
Say the names. Yeah,
Christmas Attic. It's not hidden history. I said, this isn't hidden history. It's right there. It's right in the history book. And then when you talk about Peter Salem and Salem Poor, the only 2 people commemorated at Bunker Hill were 2 Africans. And my class always said, how come we didn't know that? I said, you didn't open the book. It's right. And that's what I think the key for African Americans is, if we would just take the time and read our history, we will find out that we've been written out. That's why I talk about our good name. Our good name has been destroyed because we have not tried to recreate that good name.
And and not only that, studying history, African American history, Latino American history, Chinese American history, all the American histories of people is important for all people, because then you don't have this superiority complex, right? Right. And Malcolm talks about that. And you have a sincere appreciation and respect for everybody who built this amazing country. You know, we would not be who we are if the Chinese weren't in America. You know, we would not be where we are if Mexican Americans, Puerto Rican Americans, Cuban Americans were not here in the United States. And we would not be where we are had it not been the African Americans had not been here. So we all need to study all histories, and we all need to study our own histories in order to elevate our own identities and be able to see that it gives us self-esteem, self-respect, and we are able to encourage ourselves when we see what we have done and what we have the possibility to do.
I agree. And you know that we have that beautiful museum that opened in Washington, D.C. I was able to go
Isn't it gorgeous? It's gorgeous.
And you know, when I went to Hawaii and did the Pearl Harbor thing, I don't know if anybody's done that tour, but you see one of the, you know, there's a, you know, everybody talks about you know, Dory Miller and his great work there at Pearl Harbor. But there was also a Mexican American who also distinguished himself that day, along with whites. And so, you know, if everybody knew the story, they'd know that, you know, when you talk about heroes, heroes don't come in one flavor. They come in all different, because these are all people who are working. The potential of Americans working together is unbelievable. I mean, I go to China and I look at their infrastructure and it's unbelievable. I go to Europe, I look at their infrastructure and it's unbelievable. I go to other places, their infrastructure is unbelievable. But now I come back to America and our infrastructure is falling apart. Why? Because we have a group of people who are so dedicated to making sure that one group does not progress, that they're willing to keep themselves down. And so it's unbelievable how much potential we lose because of racism.
Yep. Well, I'm so glad we had the opportunity to have this discussion today.
As am I.
So now we're in our college segment portion, and you've talked about the importance of education and how it is so important for us to learn our history, to learn other people's histories, and really how education is important to the progress of America. And so, being a big advocate of higher education, I always have a segment where I allow my guests to give our audience their strategy for college success. So if you could, can you tell us what college or colleges did you attend, your major or majors, your degrees, and what is that strategy you would tell students in order to be successful in college?
Okay, again, I attended Florida State University. I got my undergraduate from Florida State University. I got a degree in history and I got a degree in political science. I wanted to be a lawyer at the time, but then I fell in love with history. And I got a master's degree in history. And then I got a PhD in history, all from Florida State. And my concentration was on, you know, I loved urban development and I love cities. I'm fascinated with cities. But I also fascinated with the idea of minority politics, because cities are like a big battleground that people are battling for their space in the cities. And so that's where, if there was one thing that I would tell students that would be a guarantee of their success in college, it would be one word: read. If you will take the time to read and understand the subject area that you're interested in, read everything you can about it. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an NFL quarterback, so I read biographies of all the NFL quarterbacks. If you're interested in engineering, read about engineers, some of the problems that engineering face, and so you can begin to solve those problems now. But if you take the time to read, you can solve any problem that there is, and you can be successful in any major that you want to be in. If you just take the time to read, understand if you want to be a doctor, read about doctors, read about how doctors, who are the famous doctors, what path did they take? If you want to be a nurse, read about nurses, read about how they became nurses. What are the things they're interested in? Reading is the most important thing you do. I sit in class sometimes, I ask students questions, and I'm amazed that they don't know the answer. And the reason I'm amazed they don't know the answer is because with the cell phone, you are connected to the entire, there's no subject that you can't get information on. just typing it in. And I noticed there are a few kids who are smart enough now to recognize I can just type in this thing and I can learn stuff about it. If you don't have access to the library, and almost everybody does, just your cell phone can give you enough information to make you a quasi-expert on whatever subject you want to deal with. And I would encourage you to read. And the second thing, challenge everything. That is, when I say challenge everything, if somebody tells you a story or if someone tells you something, get the books and read about what actually happened, because you find that it's always more complicated than what they told you.
Great.
And so those would be the things I would really concentrate on.
Great advice. Read. I am, as a former college professor, I was always amazed at people attending my class that didn't even read the assignment that was given. I mean, people in college and you're not reading? Come on now. So read your required text that your professors give to you, as well as read in your area of interest. You've got to learn about the topic, and you've got to learn about the experts in that particular field. So make sure you read, and then challenge everything. Critical thinking is so important to your personal and professional development. You've got to challenge and think for yourself. And that is one of the key tools as a human being that you need to succeed in life, is the ability to do critical thinking. So thank you so much, Dr. Abel Bartley, for joining us on the Empowerment Zone. You are always welcome to come back anytime.
Thank you.
A special thank you to the incredible team of the Empowerment Zone. Terry Gully, theme song. NADWorks, digital support, and of course, our featured guest.
If you enjoyed my podcast, please subscribe. We are on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Be sure to rate us on Apple Podcasts too. Thank you for your continued support.